This is Building a Creative Life. I'm Pam Vale, a New England artist, bringing the world of creativity to your door through casual conversations with artists, creators, and everyday people, helping curious, midlife women begin their next creative chapter. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. Today on the podcast, I am so excited to be talking to Nicola Farnhill for the second time, a therapist and coach devoted to guiding others back to their authentic selves. Nicola has dedicated her work to helping people process trauma, reconnect with their inner child, and find healing through creativity. In our conversation, we talk about how trauma shows up in unique ways, why validating your own story is essential, and how creativity can be one of the most powerful healing tools available to us. Nicola also shares her perspective on concepts like positive blaming, authenticity, and reclaiming joy. You'll want to listen through until the end, where I share my own reflections on how these ideas can apply to your life and creative journey. Well, hello, Nicola. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Pam. It's really super nice to be here. It was amazing last time, so I'm looking forward to this conversation and seeing where it goes today.
Me as well. And I want to thank you for broaching the topic we're going to talk about, because I think that what we're going to speak about is so universal and it's so important. And I think a lot of people will really resonate with it. But for the people who haven't watched or listened to our first episode yet, could you talk a little bit about yourself and what you do, just to give a little background?
Okay, cool. So I work with people that, well, I would say have unresolved trauma. Basically, they have things that are getting in the way of them moving forward. So you could say predominantly that it's unresolved trauma, but that obviously it affects them mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and energetically, which is huge. So that's what I help them work on. And I guess my goal in my work at this point is really to help empower people to take back their power. Because I think through trauma, we give our power away, trying to, fit in with other people, trying to become what we think other people need after trauma. So, I think that's my main goal, and I know that there's a lot of energy and power that's lost when that takes place. So I think, for me, it's really about making people realise who they really are, who they were born as, and who they can become by stepping back into their power and getting rid of all the old stuff, the old story. So yeah, that's what I do basically.
Right.
I totally love my work and really feel it's my purpose. And I think, I've walked my own journey, and I think you have to in order to do this work, you have to. And I know we all have some trauma on some levels, but I think you really need to have gone through that process. And I'm by no means there, wherever there is. I'm still a work in progress, still have my practices in place that I teach other people. But yeah, so that's basically what I do.
That's awesome. Obviously, I know you're very passionate about what you do, and I would love it if you could talk a little bit about what trauma can look like. So I know, trauma is a very big umbrella term, and
Yeah.
some people might not think it applies to them. And if you could talk a little bit about, in your experience, what trauma can look like how it can show up
Yeah.
differently for different people, like big, small, all of
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Trauma for me, as time has gone on, I've realised that it can be on the simple basic level. It can be an accident, an emergency, something that we're not prepared for. It can be an operation. The body actually becomes traumatized when it's cut. And we accept operations. All right, we need them sometimes for life-saving things. But when the body's cut, the body's traumatized. The skin is traumatized, the nerves, the blood vessels, the muscles. So that's something that the body can be traumatized with. It can be neglect of needs. It can be emotional, physical, mental, spiritual. It can be forms of control. It can be abuse. It can be suppression. Trauma is different for different people. Some people can experience the same thing. What you often find is in a family there can be two siblings to have the same upbringing, but yet have very different stories around how they were brought up. One person may say, it was a terrible traumatic time for me, it was very upsetting, I didn't have my needs met. And the other sibling would say, I don't know what you're talking about. It was a wonderful experience. We had so many wonderful memories. And that again, I think, and we touched on it before in the last podcast, was around sensitivity. I know that a lot of people that are creative are sensitive, but sensitivity and your level of sensitivity has a different impact depending on on where you are. So again, it can be two siblings with different experiences. Just two different people have different memories, different experiences, depending on their strengths, their weaknesses, their personalities. So trauma is very unique and very, very individualized. But at the same time, I think it's something that we need to look at a whole and treat holistically. And I also think that if we don't, then, at the moment we're looking at a very traumatized world just by people not understanding, as you say, what trauma is, holding these old stories, this old pain. And I think, and not condemning other people for having their own story and their own pain, which is something that we all do, we all judge. And I think that in itself is traumatizing. Being told, for example, myself, I'm very sensitive. So I was told quite often that I was too sensitive, that I was overreacting, because some people can just brush things off. And that's it. Whereas other people, it sinks very deep. So trauma is very unique and very individual. But it certainly impacts you and can impact you in every area of your life, for sure.
And I think a lot of people, what I've seen is there's a lot of comparison. So, they might think that whatever their trauma isn't maybe as big of a deal as someone who had something that we think more traditionally of
Yeah.
abuse
Yeah.
or something like that, right? So that there is value in whatever level of trauma or whatever it was,
Sure.
that it doesn't
Very
have to reach a
personal.
certain level, or you don't have to qualify. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very personal, and that's like you say. People say, "Oh, well, I shouldn't feel, that my trauma was anything to worry about." But if it's impacting your life, it's like the old saying. There's lots of sayings, worse things happen at sea, and that kind of thing. But your trauma's your own. It belongs to you. It impacts you in your own individual way, and I think that's why I always try and teach people and help people understand that to judge and condemn people based on their own story is traumatizing in itself. And if we
Hmm.
want that kind of care and thought and consideration, then we need to actually carry that out and put that onto other people as well. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And I talk a lot about creativity and creative expression and personal growth through that. And if you could talk a little bit about how trauma shows up in our lives or in our bodies, or what kind of limitations it might cause.
Yeah, huge. That's a huge topic. Okay, so the initial manifestations can be obviously very different, whether it's an accident or, it's an operation. As I say, trauma for me on a baseline is generally creates a disconnection. It creates a disconnection in the body, it creates a disconnection in the mind, in your emotions. Quite often when our needs have not been met as children, for example, which is quite a huge trauma for a lot of people, then that can manifest as believing that we're not worthy, that we're not enough. It can knock our self-confidence, our ability to show up in our own lives, because we're very much concerned about the lives of other people and meeting other people's needs. It's very much a child's perception. Children, if we have trauma as a child, then we don't have the life experience to be able to make the correct judgment about what went on.
Or even access to tools that could help us.
Just not got that availability, and it's still not as widely as available as it should be. For example, you could have a father that was absent because he was a very hard worker. But in your mind as a child, you could create the story that my dad wasn't around for me, that he didn't love me, that he didn't give me attention. Now, that may be the case, but there's not the backstory because as a child, we're not able to understand that story. And in the same sense, we know that
Right.
trauma is generational, that it passes down. So quite often, we can have this opinion about someone. They weren't there for me, they didn't show up, or they neglected me, or they abused me. But quite often, it's because that other person, that parent, didn't have those skills themselves. They didn't have that parenting. And whilst they may feel it, I think sadly we're only just coming into a real big time now where people are actually feeling that they can express the fact that they are not in a good place, that they're struggling, because vulnerability is still such a big thing. It still creates a lot of shame. To confess that we're less than perfect is re-traumatizing ourselves, but also adding
Yep.
on extra shame about what happens. So it's very misinformed. For me, it's behind every or most mental health issues, very much so. And I think it's about time that we acknowledged that trauma is something that we need to hold on to and to care for and nurture and not be ashamed about, because we all have some level of
Right.
trauma on some level.
Absolutely, whether it's current or past.
Yeah.
And you mentioned vulnerability, and again, with creativity, with artistic process, or any kind of thought of yourself as being a creative, there is so much vulnerability that comes into play with that. And talking about how creativity or creative expression can help you heal. There's sort of like, I find that there's sort of this beautiful circle that creativity can help you heal your trauma. And then as you heal your trauma, you become more creative. So it's like this beautiful, like, feeding circle that happens. And I would love if you could talk a little bit. I know in your practice, you work, you have a very creative base, and how that plays into healing trauma, healing hurt, coming out of that.
I think I think when you look at creativity as a whole, quite often when we've had trauma, we have a suppression of expression, obviously. So when that comes into play, I think most of the time, come into a place where you feel that you need to express, that you need to do things differently, that's when you start to explore. Now, it may be things that you've touched on in the past, as we spoke about last time. We quite often return to a lot of expression things that we did as a child, creative things such as I did a lot of writing. I used to like to draw, but predominantly writing for me was a form of expression because where I felt that I didn't have the capacity to speak as a sensitive child. Um, the form of writing allowed me to actually release it, to see what it was, to acknowledge it when no one else actually acknowledged, and to actually accept that and move out of a place of victimhood, because quite often, and I've heard it many times, people don't understand, but quite often as children we don't have the skills to express neither. And I don't want to take away from anyone's trauma, but how does a child express the pain and hurt when they've only lived a short space of time, for example? And also when you see other people struggling, that can be a place where we decide to shut down our own expression and creativity because we don't want to, shine the light on us to take the attention away when that person may be struggling themselves. So I think for me, writing, particularly as a form of creative expression, has allowed me to have a voice. And then that's moved on to obviously being able to help other people. There's this crazy thing where we don't want to share our stories, but yet our stories are the most powerful thing to heal the world because there's always that resonance. There's always someone that sees, your photography or your art or your writing or whatever, your music, and is moved, and is able to even with music, to hear the story within that, to be carried, and to go down that journey with that person. It's such trauma can transfer into the most beautiful thing, if you allow it to. But it is again allowing yourself to move past that shame, to feel like it wasn't your fault, but it is your responsibility. And by sharing that, there's the double whammy of healing yourself, but not only that, helping to heal other people. It's such
Right.
a beautiful journey, but one that you have to gradually move into.
And so, what are some ways that you see that people, in addition to like writing or returning to something that you might have enjoyed in the past, that
Yeah.
people can use creativity to help begin to heal, especially people in the beginning that might be just starting out?
Yeah, I think one of the nicest ways that you can actually move into creative place is to ask yourself simple questions like, what do I enjoy? What do I enjoy? What quite often when you're stuck in a traumatic place, it's very dark, heavy energy. But if we were to ask ourselves, is it like that all the time? It's not always like that all the time. So there are moments of joy. So when we have those moments, when the heaviness lifts, when the darkness lifts, when we feel light, and we have those bursts of laughter, what actually is happening at that time? And then expanding on that. So it may be observing other people play, which play is a form of creativity. Children are the best at playing. As adults, we forget to play. It's crazy. So, exploring those moments, asking yourself, what happened when I had that burst of laughter, when I had that moment of joy, what was going on? Where was I? What was I doing? And then again, expanding on that, exploring that, and just following, not following a process as such, but following your feelings, following your emotions. Having those moments when you lose time is a huge thing for creativity, when you're just lost and the soul is expressing itself. That's a great healing time, but it's also a time where we can plan that time. Sometimes I don't know what to write, so I'll just start writing. I don't know what to write, but
And
I
it
want to
triggers
write.
something, right? It start,
Yeah. And
yeah.
it can be funny, it can be funny sometimes. It doesn't have to be this masterpiece. Creativity is not about creating a masterpiece. It's about expression. It's about giving yourself joy. And if you can share that with other people, that's amazing. But yeah, write down, or draw something silly, or
Right.
create the
It's easy to
likeness.
forget that. It's easy to forget that even though, obviously trauma and healing and pain and injury and hurt, all that, it's all heavy, right? But that part of it, that bringing the play in, bringing the creativity in, like, I love that you just write, like, I don't know what to write, like, it doesn't have to be so heavy and serious, that part of it, and that's where,
Exactly.
like, the portal happens, I think, like that portal of getting through it.
Yeah. Pam, that
So
just made me
I think
think.
that's great.
It's just made me think about something there because, as when trauma has its impact, when we start to get really serious and trying to work things out and not non-expressive, it can be very heavy. And I
Mm,
think that's, as adults, we also move into that phase of life on top of any unhealed trauma. Because we have more responsibilities. When you have a child, they're very free, they're very expressive, they don't particularly, they're not conditioned at that point to actually worry about what anyone else thinks, they're pleasing themselves. You'll notice with a child when they're playing, if you try to remove them, they cry. And that's a clear indication I was having a nice time. I was creating something there with no concern who was observing, with no concern for how perfect it could be.
no outcome.
Nothing at all. Just like me, just following myself and just doing whatever comes freely. But I think that's such a huge point. I think that's when trauma really has its impact on creativity, particularly as adults, when we find ourselves uncreative and not able to express again because we've been so focused and trying to organize it in our minds mentally that we've just shut down and created a block, you know.
And you brought it up when we spoke a couple days ago about the sort of trend, not only on Substack but other social media, where people are feeling blocked, or they're feeling
Yeah.
I don't know, like they're in a rut, or they're not like there's some kind of barrier to them expressing themselves, but people want to. I feel like there's a trend where people want to, but they're just shut off.
Yeah, I think you know what, a huge part of that, particularly if your creativity is like on Substack, is around the social media or that kind of place. And if you're trying to create something more than just self-expression, for example, right? You're trying to teach through your experiences through creativity on Substack. We do it through writing and videos and various other forms, but predominantly writing. I honestly believe that there's a huge pressure again for that perfectionism to deliver to when we look at social media, then we're then looking at, you know, the comparison comes into play, which is very oppressive to creativity. It's like, you know, I've got 5 likes, they've got 20. Obviously mine's no good. So the creativity just shuts down, you know. So we have to look
Yeah.
at who are we doing it for? Firstly, we always need to be doing it for ourselves to fill ourselves up. Because if we're not full, then we're not able to overflow onto other people. And then it has to be, if it can be, to serve a higher good, if we've had an experience through creativity. But quite often it can be just an inspiration of someone seeing a painting and thinking, wow, you know, that's something that I would have liked to have done. I maybe could have done that. It's creativity creates freedom, freedom of the
Mm-hmm.
soul.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes we don't see the growth or the healing that's taking place while we're doing it. Like we'll feel it later, but we
Yeah.
don't, like in the moment you don't see that happening, or you don't see like the power of example you might be for somebody else, you know. And you talk about being authentic and sharing our stories, like you don't necessarily always see that benefit, but it is there.
It is there, and I think that's the challenge with the social media situation, you know, is that you kind of have no idea. I believe that probably 90% of people that read your material or look at your material or whatever, or listen to it even, you would never even meet or connect with.
Mm-hmm.
So it really, really
Right.
is about, if you're creating on a level to help people, for example, that really is about, you know, doing what your soul needs to express, whilst at the same time doing it for a higher purpose. But at the same time, if you're doing it just for self-expression, just for healing, just to get out different energies and emotions at that time, then that is a form of therapy that you should be doing, for me, all your life, some form, whether it's cooking in the
Absolutely.
kitchen, you know. It's just, it's moving you out of structure. It moves you into a place of,
Mm-hmm.
let's see what will happen, let's be curious about what can happen.
Right. And it's never too late too. And you know, I know that you believe that like different things happen at different times, like you're a different person at a different time, and you're able to like process and use tools or heal in different ways that you might not have been able to
That's right.
previously. So it's never
That's
too
right.
late.
It's never too late, and I think what you've got to understand is that things will happen in your life at different times, and they will
Mm-hmm.
force you to express different emotions. So we never know what's going to happen in the future. But I think what we've got to be doing is we've always got to be open. And I think a huge part of creativity is actually looking at, you know, who you are now and accepting that you're on a continuous journey. And although your article may not be in, you know, the number one best selling article or whatever on a platform right now, but it doesn't mean that it's not good enough. It doesn't mean that just because nobody's validated that it's not good, because creativity is always good. It's always good for the value of
Mm-hmm.
expression. We need to express.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about somatic healing?
Okay. So somatic healing is more about creating the capacity within the body to express. When we've unresolved trauma, quite often the body carries the energy. We often think it's in the mind because that's where the logical place for it happens. We can rationalize it there, but the body stores traumatic energy. When we have a shock, when, as I say, when the body's being cut, when we're holding in emotions, then the body stores that, and over time it increases. And that's why quite often we get a lot of health conditions which can grow into serious things. So, creativity and expression is not just something that we do to express and to let things flow. It's also, as we say, a healing process. So somatic healing is about basically moving the body through breath or through actually moving the limbs in order to create a vessel and a capacity inside, not only to hold more healthily, but also to be able to release that. I always recommend with my clients that they and we do practice breathing, which is very somatic. It calms the nervous system. It attends to the nervous system when it's not fully activated in a healthy way. So breathing, particularly yin yoga, is very good because that stretches the fascia, which is the connective tissue in the joints and around the body. And fascia is predominantly where traumatic energy is held. So that's quite often why you'll find people doing things like tapping their feet or clicking their fingers, twirling their hair, biting their lips. And that's just the energy wanting to be released. So you can do things like, I think at this time there was quite a popular demand for the ice challenges, for doing the cold water plunging. Obviously, cold water activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which needs to be activated in a healthy way in order to release the energy and be able to cope with the traumas of life, not just the ones that have happened in the past. There's so many different things, but I think predominantly breathing and movement, stretching, cold water. If people aren't familiar, then they can go on to Google, go on to YouTube, ask your therapist.
Mm-hmm.
But somatics is basically the movement of energy, and that can be negative and positive. But in trauma healing, it's predominantly negative. So it's, for
And I saw
me,
something
so important.
recently. Yeah. I saw something recently about it that talked about somatic spaces, like creating the space around you, or they didn't call it decorating. I forgot what word they used, but it was something where it was even thinking about the energy around in your environment,
Yeah.
which can be a creative expression.
Absolutely. And I think that's, we all, sometimes we're not aware, but we all have that tendency towards different colours and different textures,
Mm-hmm.
things that comfort us. My place is always full of plants and green things, and sometimes we don't ask ourselves why. Why is that? And it's because it's our own natural form of expression. I can't think of anything worse than having bright red or luminous yellow around me, because to me it's too activating. So I need those like low-key earthy colors. And again, we can create our own environment with those, and that is a form of somatic, healing in itself. It's just pleasing on the eye. It brings a more calming influence, and that expands again out into the people that we spend time with. All affects our nervous system, and the things that we listen to. For me, that's really about absorption. Are we conscious about what we absorb? Whether that's, if we think about absorption through the senses, are we happy with what we touch, what we smell, what we eat, what we hear, what we see? Because as children, again, for example, we didn't have the options to make all those choices all the time. But as adults, we can make those choices. And when we start to heal, then that's when we can create those environments that support us as opposed to suppress us. That's just made me think, Pam. Can you imagine if, as a parent, I don't know how many parents would listen to this, but imagine what work a parent would have to do to understand exactly what a child would need, and when we just look at it on that level. What colors do you like? You know,
Interesting.
not just what do you like to look at, but what do you want in your environment? What do you like to smell? But you know that's such big work, isn't it? So you know, maybe a child could
It
say,
is.
"I didn't have my needs met because my bedroom was painted bright red and I wanted yellow." You know, that may be
Right.
that would have been traumatizing to me. So it's
Exactly. And I think, yeah.
from
No, go
that
ahead.
we can kind of say that, you know, if someone's to say my needs weren't met as a child, for example, obviously there's the things that are traumatizing, but could our needs have ever been met wholly? I don't think
Mm,
so.
right. Because, and everybody's human, right? And they do the best they can with what they have to work with at the time, I
Absolutely.
think.
Absolutely. And it's we if we're
Um,
taking a lifetime to understand ourselves, you know, for a parent to do
right.
that in like 16,
With all
18,
of the other
19
stuff.
years with
Yeah.
all your own stuff going on as well, it's literally impossible. So
Exactly.
I think from that we can do something that I chose to do in my healing journey is to do positive blaming, because it's always the negative blaming. So the positive blaming would be, you know, that whilst my needs weren't all met, you know, my parents still did a good job of A, B, C, and D and E. Because quite often when we've been traumatized and we've been suppressed, we only look at the negative, and we forget about the good things that have gone on as well. So we can positive blaming is very healthy when it comes to healing, particularly in relationships. I'm not saying that all relationships can be healed, and I understand that sometimes separation is necessary, whether it's for a while or whether it's permanently. But I think if it's not permanent, then part of the journey at some time can be looking at the past, looking at the parenting or the caregivers, and saying, well, actually, yes, that did happen. However, that also happened as well. Because it's quite easy to become a
It's
victim,
wonderful.
isn't
I've
it?
never heard that term before. I love that. I've never heard that term.
And we can do it with our
Positive
relationships
blaming.
now, with our friendships when we have an argument,
Mm.
because our when we're hurt, the focus tends to be on what that person has done to us.
Yeah.
You know,
But I
and
think
we
it's in all
forget the us.
areas, right?
Yeah,
It seems like it's in all areas of our life that we tend to focus on the negative. You know, you think about like even something as simple as writing reviews for businesses that you that you frequent. Like that's always the reviews that are negative, right? It's not it's very infrequent that it's the positive. People take time to focus on that.
that's right, and it's super important because, you know, on a spiritual level, you know, we attract what we are. We attract the experiences what we are, and I think if we choose to, I wrote a little post the other day, and I was like, that's so important that people understand that if we condemn, then we attract condemnation. If we criticize, then we attract criticism. You know, so you know, if we can try as best we can to behave in ways that we want to receive back to us, that we want to be given back to us, because at the end of the day, what is the benefit? It's great if it's positive criticism, if it's for a restaurant review, and you were to say, you know, it's been great before, but this time we were disappointed, from a place of wanting to help the business, you know, instead of wanting to ruin the business, which some people would do,
Exactly. A
particularly if they were
lot.
hungry.
Right. I think that a lot of times people too don't trust themselves like in talking about like the creative spaces, right? Or finding things that bring you joy, like your color palette or your plants or whatever. I find that people, especially as they get to this age, like midlife and beyond, a lot of times they don't trust their choices or they don't trust that gut feeling of what they do want to surround themselves with because it might be a lot of shoulds or you're supposed to do things a certain way, especially talking about more like decorating or their wardrobe or items that they surround themselves with. And I feel like getting back to really trying to figure out who you are and what you like can be very difficult for people.
so difficult, and it's often in those moments in midlife, for example, that we realize that we how long we have been carrying the trauma, how long we have shaped and molded ourselves into what we believe other people need, considering looking out all the time to what other people need, as opposed to, and that really reflects in that, Pam. It really reflects in that, because all of a sudden people start to ask us questions. What music do you like? What do you like to do for your activities? And a lot of the times people say, I have no idea. And that is really a sign that you need to do some more healing, that there needs to be that exploration. And one of the things that I do with my clients straight away is go back to the inner child healing, to reconnect with the child, because, as I said before, quite often playfulness is the place. The inner child is within you all the time. There's always an element, doesn't matter how big or old you are, of playfulness. And I think playfulness is directly linked to creativity. So for me, it's about sometimes doing something and not knowing how it's going to work out, but and being silly around it. I think one of the greatest places to be silly is when you've got children or grandchildren of a certain age, because you're allowed to go on the young rides, you're allowed to go on the climate
Right.
frames and release that part of yourself. And if you're not, then it's around taking time to explore. But I feel that that really is a healing process in itself, exploring the inner child, exploring and asking yourself the questions of, whose ideas about myself did I take on board? Who did I listen to? Um, are those words that I speak to myself my words, or the words of someone else? And it is
And are they
can be,
still useful?
absolutely, it can be a big process, but I think it is an ongoing process for everyone. So if anyone that's just starting right now, then I would say, the first thing you need to do is stop speaking to yourself in a bad way with the words of maybe someone else, and ask yourself, and I think this is really powerful, I use it a lot with my clients, is to ask them, how they speak to themselves, what phrases they use, and then explain about the child within us that was maybe still hurting from the past. And then to ask them, would you speak to a child that way? Because every time you berate yourself or pull yourself down, then you're actually speaking to the child within you. And if you could,
I just got chills.
yeah, if you can imagine that child, have a photograph and look at that child, that small you, and look at them and think about speaking the way that you speak to yourself as an adult with that little child. There's no way you could do that.
No way. That's
No.
so powerful.
Yeah.
I read a quote in between when we spoke the other day and now, and the quote was, "You're not healing to be able to handle trauma, pain, anxiety, and depression because you're used to those. You're
Yeah.
healing to be able to handle joy and accept happiness in your life." And I thought that was so beautiful
So good.
because I think we're so focused on the pain or whatever happened, and we don't look at the other side, that it can be difficult to feel joy. It can be difficult to feel like, even,
To
doing
allow
that
yourself.
practice of thinking, yeah, like, right.
I actually explored that quite a lot at one time, because I felt that I couldn't allow myself. I found myself feeling very uncomfortable, quite a few years ago, with people being really happy. Not because I didn't want them to be, but
Yeah.
because I was so focused, as you say, on the negative, dark energies. We haven't got time for that because we've got the healing to do and we've got to analyze everything. Um, and I found that I would. I think I wrote an article somewhere about allowing yourself to be happy, which is absolutely insane. Yet when you look at people that come into a therapy environment, for example, or that are depressed, or they're not good in a good place, predominantly they won't allow themselves to, because they've practiced being in that negative place for so long, and there's no blame or no shame for that. It's normal, completely normal. But isn't it crazy that we couldn't allow ourselves to be happy? um
Right.
but that
Or we don't know how to deal with those feelings. We don't know how to be in that good
Absolutely,
energy.
or to allow those feelings to come in, or again to express them, and then we come full circle again back to creativity. Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely.
That's
I will
beautiful.
definitely put all of your contact information in the show notes too, so people can find you. Could you talk just a little bit about a little bit more about what you do and how you help people and resources that you think are good for people?
Yeah, I think, if you were to be starting your healing journey now or wanting to explore your creativity, have no idea kind of who you are, what you like, etc., then I think look at the healing journey and the creative journey as a whole, a mental, physical, emotional, spiritual experience. So that's the way that I used to work predominantly in counselling, so it was very mentally orientated. But then obviously I realised that there was a physical self, the ability to express emotions, and something that's been important with me for the last maybe 10 years, a spiritual element. So I think anybody that's going down that journey now, I think like I do with my clients, we now, and I think a lot of healers and therapists are looking at the same thing, it is a holistic journey. You can't just look at one element of your life and wipe out the old story, the old beliefs. It's engrossed in your soul, it's engrossed in your physical self. And that's something that I work with and I feel is so important, because having done the mental work myself at one time, I did experience that feeling of, well, my body still feels it, and I know that, and it did oppress my creativity, etc. So I think for me, some great forms to start with would be someone that's involved in cognitive behaviour therapy, someone like myself that's able to look at things from a psychological and cognitive aspect as well. The more experiences, this is the strange thing, the more experiences you have in therapy as a therapist, the more you kind of hone down and apply whatever you feel with each client. It does mean that you have to learn more. However, it's a lot more satisfying and a beautiful gift for other people to be able to come into space with you and feel seen and heard. Because as we know, that's one of the biggest things around trauma, is not feeling understood, and then not expressing yourself authentically. So I would think that, you know, really, if you can, depending on how comfortable you are, then I would suggest going to someone privately. If you feel like what we've talked about, you don't know who you are, or you're confused about who you are, you are not able to express yourself comfortably and fully, whether that's creatively or with people. If you don't feel like you're living an authentic life,
Yeah.
and I think we all
Because it's
embody those
available.
masks, and and we all, we all put on those masks, and life, we have to apply different things to different people, different environments. But if you don't feel like you're living as yourself, then that is the time to go to someone and say, hey, this is what I'm going through. And that, if they're a good therapist, then they'll go back, me too, I went through that, or I went through some similar, or because that creates the comfort, that creates that connection
Mm-hmm.
that maybe you've not had before, which is likely you've not had before with
Mm-hmm.
anyone. So I think if you don't feel comfortable with yourself and you're not living authentically, then I would say to anyone, please take that step outside of your shame and know that everyone has something, most definitely.
Definitely. And it doesn't have to be forever. I know that you believe that there
No.
should be a point where they launch, or they
Absolutely.
start to apply.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's about moving from that survival place into thriving, feeling powerful again, feeling able to dream again, feeling able to achieve your goals, feeling whole. Because as we spoke about before in the last podcast, about the fact that we're born whole, we're born powerful. Babies don't have shame for crying for what they need. I'm not saying it's appropriate as an adult to do that, but we should still feel worthy of.
And we're born creative.
Yes, absolutely that. And again, on a spiritual level, that's that creative energy coming through, which I would definitely say, if you are not living an authentic life, then you are going to struggle with that creative energy. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have to
Mm.
think about. I just have this vision of like Vincent van Gogh and a lot of the great artists, and
Mhm.
thinking about how even ones that died young or committed suicide or whatever were very not happy in their lives. Yes, they were
Mm.
successful, but they were creative. But even though it was the dark creativity, a lot of the time it was still there. It was still
Yeah,
there. So
definitely.
it can be empowering. Creativity, dark energy can be empowering. The challenge is making sure you don't get stuck there when it's a regular thing.
Right. And look for help because there is help available.
So much help and more help than was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I think now therapy is the word at the moment. Everybody's going into therapy and everybody's seeking help, and I think it's an exciting time because it's the shame is being dropped, and I think that's so important, so important. And hopefully we'll see.
Definitely.
Well, we need more creatives, don't we? There's always more things to create, and right now the biggest thing I think is creating a better world, which we all need to be a part of for sure, for sure.
Absolutely. And something to balance out the advances in technology, which is wonderful, but then
Yeah,
we need the balance of human creativity,
absolutely.
I
Being in
feel.
nature, like you talk about technology, being in nature for me is
Mm.
nature's the most creative thing ever. You look at the colours and the details in the flowers. If you spend some mindful time in nature, then you're not just what's that phrase? You need to stop and smell the roses because that it's nature's just mind blowing, isn't it? I get a lot of my creativity from being outside. The concrete
Yeah.
walls just don't do it for me.
No. And the
And
artificial light.
great conversations, finding your people and having amazing conversations that
Mhm.
inspire. As we've been talking, I've had lots of ideas and lots of thoughts, and we don't often realise that just choosing the people that we surround ourselves with and have conversations is
Mhm.
super important when it comes to creativity as well. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Ah, I love this conversation.
I
Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you would like to
don't.
talk
I
about or
think
share?
I don't, I don't think so. I think it's such a huge topic, isn't it? Such a huge topic. Um,
Mhm.
I don't think so. I think it is very much about if you don't feel that you're living an authentic life, you have to, or else it's a wasted life. And I'm not taking away from the fact that it can be very challenging to find your authentic voice again, to move out of the fear, and into having faith in yourself and having faith in the fact that you have got worth and you are enough and you are valid and valuable. Um, it can be a real challenging journey, but it's a journey that I believe we should take because that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for sure.
Mhm. What a waste. What a waste to not do that.
And I see that a lot. And some of my clients are 50s, 60s, some a little bit older. It's there's nobody or nothing worth not being yourself for. Yeah, yeah.
That's an awesome place to leave it. Well, thank you so much, Nicola. I'm so happy we got to talk again and come back anytime. And
Thank
I
you
look
so
forward
much.
to staying in
I
touch.
love it. Yeah, and one of the
Yeah.
things, Pam, that's great for me is whilst I'm talking, it's it's creates a lot of creativity for me as well. It reminds me of a lot of things, and sometimes we can speak about things that we people should be doing, and we've fallen short on those
Mhm.
ourselves. So I've had lots of reminders today while we've been talking. Thank you.
Oh, I love hearing that. That's awesome. And I can't wait to see them and like watch you and see it come to fruition.
Thank you so much. It's so
Thank you
lovely.
so much.
Okay, speak to you soon. Take care.
As I reflect on this conversation with Nicola, I keep coming back to one central truth: healing and creativity are deeply connected. We often think of trauma as something that silences us, that takes away our power. But what I love about Nicola's perspective is the reminder that trauma doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can actually be the start for expression, for transformation, and for reclaiming joy. One of the most powerful takeaways here is that your trauma is your own. It doesn't have to look like anyone else's. You don't have to compare it or justify it or minimize it. Simply acknowledging your experience is the first step towards healing. And from there, creativity becomes the bridge, whether that's journaling or painting or gardening or movement, or simply making space for play. Creative expression helps us connect with our inner child, the part of us that still knows how to imagine and dream. We also talked about somatic healing, the way our bodies hold on to experiences. Too often, we try to think our way through healing, but real transformation often starts when we give the body permission to release, to move, and to breathe again. Another moment that struck me was Nicola's point about authenticity. There's nobody worth not being yourself for. How often do we shrink or hide, thinking it will make things easier, when in reality, every step we take towards being fully ourselves brings us closer to freedom and peace. If you're listening and wondering how this applies to you, I'd encourage you to start small and ask yourself, what's one way I can express myself today, even if nobody sees it? What's one playful thing I can do that reminds me of joy? Healing isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about showing up for yourself with compassion, allowing space for both the pain and the possibility. I hope this episode inspires you to reconnect with your creativity, to trust your own process, and to know that you are not alone in this journey. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe for free and share it with a friend. It helps others find the show and grows our community. Remember, creativity is yours to define, there are no rules, and it's never too late. Until next time.